Hello, everyone. It's nice to see so many familiar faces, very familiar faces, and some new faces. Donc, je m'appelle Simon Ouellet, je suis responsable des communications au syndicat canadien de la fonction publique. Et je vous invite à prendre des places. Si vous manquez de place et vous voulez une chaise, ça veut dire que vous devez venir en avant. Là. Il y en a 2-3 de vides. So today, we're doing the book launch. And it's a joint book launch. It's not just CUPE, it's also the New Brunswick Media Co-op book launch. Donc, merci à vous tous. Merci à vous d'être ici. Ce soir, on célèbre un moment historique dans l'histoire du Nouveau-Brunswick. Ce soir, on est ici en personne, mais il y a aussi des gens en ligne et j'aimerais les saluer. Bon, on ne peut pas les voir, mais ils sont là, il y a une caméra, c'est diffusé en ligne. So we're live streaming tonight. This is on CUPE's webpage, CUPE's Facebook page, and there's people who couldn't be here that wanted to see what's going on. So hello to you. If you need interpretation, there are devices at the back of the room. Si vous avez besoin de l'interprétation en anglais ou en français, il y a des appareils dans le fond de la salle. J'aime sauter de l'anglais et du français pour le moment parce que, en attendant que les gens vont chercher leur bidule, là, vous allez gérer ça. Donc, sans plus tarder, avant qu'on présente les auteurs et tout le travail qui a été fait, je vais donner la parole à Steve Dross, qui est président du syndicat canadien de la fonction publique, division Nouveau-Brunswick. Steve Dross, president of CUPE New Brunswick, will talk, and he will be the MC for tonight. It's not me, so good luck.
Merci beaucoup, Simon. You always do a great job. First of all, it's exciting to see all of you here tonight. The room is packed, and I remember a lot of these faces that were on the picket lines not too long ago. You did an amazing job. Very excited about tonight. I just want to say a few things before I turn it over. I would like to have some words from our national president, Mark Hancock, as well as Candace Rennick, who is joining us online but not presenting. Candace had an emergency she had to deal with, and she gives her regrets. And once Mark has had a few words, we would actually, I would like to introduce the authors to you, as well as one of our steering committee members that was, played a critical role in us capturing the history of what we did, what our workers did in 2021. So I think when anything of this magnitude happens, it's really important that it get down in text because it can get lost. As Simon had mentioned, it was an historical moment. And after 15 to 20 years of austerity, the workers had told the leaders they had had enough and they were prepared to do whatever they needed to do to try and get some respect at the bargaining table and actually get some fair wages. And not only did the workers prevail, but the public got behind them. It was really a turning point for these workers because now all of a sudden, public was supporting them, respecting them, and it was a critical, just an essential part of a 4-year journey. I mean, it's called breaking the mandate, and that's what you did. But without further ado, I would like to introduce to you our national president. CUPE was fantastic. The idea was, can we capture this in some sort of context? Not only did CUPE National agree to fund a book to capture the historical labor achievement here in New Brunswick of 2021, they also sponsored a documentary that'll be coming out later. But without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Mark Hancock. Mark is our national president. Mark has been extremely active in the union since I think he said he was 12 years old. He comes from Local 498 in Coquitlam. Port Coquitlam. Okay, sorry. And he was the president there, but Mark went on to be the secretary treasurer for CUPE BC for many years. And I believe it was in 2005 you started attending the National Executive Board. And in 2015, Mark was elected as our 6th national president of CUPE. So without further ado, Brother Mark, floor is all yours.
Right on. How y'all doing? Pretty good. Excellent. Bonjour tout le monde. Merci d'être ici. I want to start off by, this mic's a little bit loud because my voice is a little bit loud. I'll try and tone it down a little bit. I want to start off by thanking Steve and the executive board here for this invitation. Worked out fantastically well. I was here attending our staff meetings with our great staff in the Maritimes region. And as Sandy is sitting there as well, our regional director. So I want to thank her for all of her work. And Candace, who's joining us, I guess, online. I know Candace really wanted to be here. Candace Rennick, our National Secretary Treasurer, and is not able to be here, but I know she sends her solidarity. I also want to acknowledge my friend Danny Legier, or sitting right over there. Did you bring some fish and chips with you, my friend? Sure. But a lot of folks had a big role in what happened here in New Brunswick in the fall of 2021. And it didn't happen overnight, as I'm sure you know. It happened over a series of years, and under Danny's leadership, it started and it continued on. And of course, the CUPE New Brunswick Executive Board conventions and delegates and activists and leaders all played a huge role in standing up to this government and getting some real wage increases for everybody. I want to thank you for being here to celebrate the launch of Bargaining Forward, the story of the 2021 CUPE strike in New Brunswick. I just got my hands on a copy right off the press. I love the smell of a new book. It's got that special smell. But this book tells a story that I'm very proud of, because it really is about a CUPE success story. It's the story of thousands of CUPE members standing together in solidarity, taking on a government that showed no respect for them, for their work, for the family, for the services that they provide, and bottom line, for the good people of New Brunswick who rely on those services. Bargaining Forward is a story of workers talking to each other about the injustices that they faced and deciding to do something about it. It's an inspiring story. And my friends, it's just the beginning. Workers in New Brunswick, not just CUPE members, now know what can be achieved through collective action. The story of the 2021 strike in New Brunswick is actually chapter 1 of a bigger story, because CUPE members here in New Brunswick have started a movement that is spreading across the country. They inspired 55,000 CUPE members in Ontario, who also broke the mandate when they took on the Ford government just a few months ago. This is what I'm proud of. Workers in New Brunswick want better working conditions for themselves, but also led the way for others to do the same thing. So thank you to Susan, to David, and the New Brunswick Media Co-op for writing this book. And I can't wait to read it and to look at all the fabulous pictures. I know it'll be a real page turner. Thank you for documenting the events of 2021 and the months prior to it for our children and for our grandchildren. Some who will have lived through that strike on the picket line with many of you and our members across the province. Some who will have vaguely heard about it, and some who will learn about the victories that we had thanks to your work. There is nothing like a good story to keep the passion for social justice alive. Thank you, my friends. Solidarity.
Thank you very much for that, Mark. Some great words, and like you say, this has really inspired a lot of other people. And again, thank you for your kind words. Without further ado, I would like to introduce to you the authors of this book. They did a fabulous job. They interviewed a lot of people. They were very patient, and but they were also very diligent in making sure to capture some of the true stories and the essence of what really happened during that 4-year period. And I'm going to start out. I'll introduce the table, but in terms of speakers, I'll start. David Frank is well-known as an educator and a scholar. He's a professor emeritus in Canadian history at UNB, and he's the author of Provincial Solidarities, A History of New Brunswick Federation of Labor, which was published in both English and French. He's also co-authored and edited many other books, and he's published more than 100 journals, books, and chapters and essays. Dr. David Frank, when I called Dr. Frank, the December, or it was early January, literally after the strike, I said, I would love to find a way if we could capture this somehow. And it was Dr. Frank that actually said, well, you should be talking to Susan O'Donnell, because her and I have been talking about this. And then they brought in David Koch. So I've had the good fortune of hearing Dr. Frank, and I just want to say you were the quarterback behind our steering committee and helped us get this going. And I really appreciate that very much. So we're going to hear from Dr. Frank, who wrote the intro, and then I will introduce Susan O'Donnell and David Koch to you, and they are the authors of this book. Dr. Frank, or as he always tells me, Stephen, it's David.
Yes, thank you, Brother Stephen. As some of you know, I have a background in writing and teaching labor history. And my part in this project started, as Steve said, almost exactly 1 year ago, on a January winter day that was actually a little colder than this, when I received a phone call from Steve, and it did not take him long to convince me to take off my mittens and get to work. What he had in mind, of course, was a history of the 16 days that shook the province in the fall of 2021. I knew this was history calling. Like other New Brunswickers, I'd been watching it build up for years under both Liberal and Conservative governments. I was there with fellow union members in front of the legislature on that sunny November day when 5,000 people came out for one of the largest protests ever held in the provincial capital. And I was there a few days later when the Premier, on the steps of the legislature, vainly attempted, like a proverbial King Canute, to hold back the tide. Now, for this project, my assignment was to give editorial advice and write an introduction. And one thing I wanted to do especially was to remind people that there was a time, in 1963 to be exact, when there were only 2,500 CUPE members in this province. There are more than 10 times as many today, making CUPE the province's largest and strongest union. This should be proof that working people can make history, that history happens when they come together in common purpose. And in this union, a central purpose has been to insist that a healthy society depends on a generous range of public goods, and that the union members who deliver them are entitled to the respect and rewards that come with good jobs. And what we want for ourselves, and this too is important, we want for all workers. It's Burns Day today, as some of you know, and I have a little note here from Robbie Burns to tell us this. For all that, and all that, it's coming yet for all that. That peace and plenty, the whole world o'er, shall come for us, for all that. My theme is that there's a need for union members and the public here and beyond to see themselves as participants in an ongoing story. And these 10 short chapters are a case study in the world of labor relations and in the activism of union members. In these pages, you'll read about the collective bargaining system as it now exists, including the restrictions and frustrations facing workers who try to exercise their rights. And readers who are less familiar with unions will learn a good deal about how unions function and how members participate in formulating policy and making decisions. That's no small thing. The great people's historian Howard Zinn once said that working people need to see themselves in action, that history can help us discover the times when people have shown the ability to resist, to join together, to make a difference, and win changes. The Bargaining Forward campaign was such a time. And for that reason, this book, with its lively story and its also vivid illustrations, is a notable contribution to people's history in this province. Stephen's phone call that January day made it clear to me that this union understands the importance of knowing their history and sharing their experience. And they've put their resources behind this project. From the start, as Steve has mentioned, the smartest thing I did was to call in the folks from the NB Media Co-op, who've done so much to tell the story of the campaign while it was happening. They're your friends. Susan O'Donnell and David Koch have done a wonderful job of working with union members and staff to prepare this book. It was my privilege to lend a hand, and now to let you hear from the co-authors, Susan and David. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David, for those kind words. And it was very cold, but it was a great call. So always enjoy working with you. Some of you may not recall, I'm going to share a little story, but Dr. Frank actually was at our Solidarity Conference that kicked off the thought process at the very beginning of this. We had a Solidarity Conference in Fredericton, and it was Dr. Frank who was one of our keynote speakers that day to fire us up. And that was before the campaign was rolled out, right before it. So always a pleasure, David. Now it is also a great pleasure of mine to introduce to you Susan O'Donnell. Susan is a researcher and an adjunct professor at UNB and St. Thomas University. She writes for the NB Media Co-op on topics such as labor movement, climate history. Environment's extremely important to Susan. She's also former president of the Professional Institute of Public Service of Canada's National Bargaining Group, representing researchers at the National Research Council. So without further ado, I met Susan on many other occasions, and she was out there on the lines getting our story and was there while our members were on strike. But without further ado, we're going to hear from our author, Susan.
I'm so excited to be here. When I came in, I was actually chatting with one of the members who said, I've never been to a book launch before. And so I just want to say, I'm so happy to see so many members here, and this is your book. So you're in the right place. This is great. I have written dozens of stories about the struggles of CUPE in New Brunswick for the NB Media Co-op. And as Steve mentioned, I was a former labor leader, a president of a group, and that experience taught me that public sector unions are fighting for two things at once: members' rights, including fair wages, but also quality public services. And the two are obviously connected, because without fair wages for public sector workers, the employer will not be able to attract and retain the workers necessary to deliver the quality services that they're trained to deliver. A strike is, of course, a last resort, and achieving success is very hard. It's very hard, and it's a lot of work. I hope this book was able to capture all of these elements and all the work that CUPE members put in for many years leading up to the strike. So the book starts more than 4 years before that day in October 2021 when the first pickets went up. There are 10 chapters, and the strike starts in chapter 7. So it gives you a sense of how long it took to get there. And I'm going to do a short reading from chapter 2, which happened in 2019. And I chose this chapter because it's another example before the strike of how hard CUPE must fight for fair wages and quality public services. And so this is a bit from the chapter called Nursing Home Runaround. May Day 2019 was not business as usual at the Minister of Social Development offices on King Street in Fredericton. The doors were locked, the minister was absent, and people were camped out in the corridor, wearing black t-shirts emblazoned with the Bargaining Forward slogan. Many protesters at this occupation were bargaining team members for the New Brunswick Council of Nursing Home Unions, NBC NHU, which represented about 4,000 workers in CUPE locals in 51 nursing homes across New Brunswick. Others at the protest were CUPE staff. Council President Sharon Tier, a resident attendant at a St. John area nursing home with more than 20 years of work experience, explained that they were demanding to meet with the Minister of Social Development. The nursing home sector is in crisis, she told an NB Media Co-op reporter at the occupation site. That was me, actually. For decades, the nursing homes had been suffering from staff shortages and absenteeism rates caused by injury and burnout. With New Brunswick's aging population, they were hard-pressed to meet the basic needs of current residents and to deal with growing wait lists of seniors requiring higher levels of care. The NBC-NHU wanted to restart meaningful negotiations for their contract, which had expired 3 years earlier. CUPE was forced to accept wage concessions in that contract after the Gallant Liberal government pushed an austerity agenda and as newspapers battered the union in the court of public opinion. In May 2018, the NBC-NHU had reached a tentative agreement that was rejected by nursing home workers unwilling to accept another contract with low wages. They were determined to bring the situation to wider public attention. By the time of the occupation, CUPE was dealing with a new government elected 6 months earlier, led by progressive conservative leader Blaine Higgs. Blaine Higgs is in the book a lot. The dramatic action by nursing home workers on May Day 2019 was prompted by a head-spinning round of maneuvers by the Higgs government that convinced union leaders the province had no intention of bargaining with nursing home workers in good faith. On March 7th, 2019, NBC-NHU workers voted 94% in support of strike action. But rather than return to the bargaining table, Premier Higgs launched a direct attack. He sent his lawyers to Moncton and on March 9th secured a 10-day court injunction to prevent the strike. Over the next months, he obtained extensions to the court injunction. Barred from striking, CUPE nursing home workers took to the streets to raise public awareness of their situation. They were now at the center of the Bargaining Forward campaign. Over the next weeks, CUPE members waved the now familiar signs with raised fists at rallies in Shippagan, St. John, Edmundston, Sussex, and Quispamsis, as well as Fredericton. Still, the Higgs government was unmoved, and the minister responsible for nursing homes, Dorothy Shepherd, postponed scheduled meetings with Sharon Tier. Stopped from exercising their right to strike, the union turned to direct action on May 1st and for several days maintained their occupation at the minister's offices. Sharon Tier later recalled, "The occupation is one of my proudest moments." Thank you. Now I'll turn it over to my co-author, David Koch, also with the NB Media Co-op. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Susan. And you and the NB Media Co-op did amazing coverage of us over the strike, but you're also doing other amazing work out there on other social justice issues. So always a treat to work with the NB Media Co-op. When we did start the project or whatever, Susan was, interested very much and but really wanted some support and some help on that. And she suggested perhaps we could have someone else work with her on that. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce to you the second author of the book, David Gordon Koch. And David is a reporter with the CHMA, the radio station in Sackville, and he's also the manager of the New Brunswick Media Co-op. His roots are in community radio, but he also has reported for outlets including the Times and Transcript, where he was a member of the Moncton Typographical Union. Anyway, without further ado, I'd like to introduce you the other author, David. The mic is yours.
Thanks a lot, Steve. Warmer reception than what the Minister of Education got when he was here a few nights ago. I don't know if anyone was here for that. I was reporting for CHMA on that event, and And you can see that article on our website for CHMA and also on the Media Co-op, nbmediacoop.org. And I just wanted to say I'm so proud to be here alongside union leaders and researchers and writers and speaking to union members and also I hope members of the NB Media Co-op, they're here in this room or tuning in virtually. I wanted to just take a few minutes to talk about why I think it matters for reporters to work with unions and try harder to represent the labor movement. Before I joined the NB Media Co-op, I, as mentioned, I spent a bit of time working for Times and Transcript, part of the Brunswick News empire that formerly belonged to J.D. Irving before it was sold recently to Post Media, which after shortly thereafter, Jamie Irving was appointed as executive chairperson of that even larger mass media conglomerate. And when I was working for the Times and Transcript, I spent some time as a Moncton City Hall reporter. At one point, I covered a city council meeting in October 2020, where councillors discussed whether or not to complete the privatization of garbage collection services in the city of Moncton, giving the last remaining CUPE garbage collection job to a private firm. At the council meeting, a local CUPE official, Keith Haddo, addressed councillors during a period that was set aside for presentations from the public. And at the time, he talked about how unions provide good, stable jobs for people and keep them out of poverty in contract to private contractors. And he said, I've got a quote here, contractors are hiring employees at $15 an hour. And he said some make as little as $12 an hour. He added that people earning less than a living wage tend to remain dependent on government assistance. Of course, the city went on to privatize anyway. I duly reported the CUPE officials' comments in my article, and to their credit, newspaper ran the story. But days later, the paper ran a union bashing editorial without even mentioning those arguments that had been put forward about poverty level wages in the private sector. The headline was "City made right call on garbage collection." And of course, the whole problem was framed in terms of cost savings for taxpayers without so much as acknowledging this question of good jobs being replaced by poverty level jobs. Later on, I wound up meeting a worker, one of those private companies. He had a young child, and he worked, riding on the back of the truck in all kinds of weather, hauling those bags of refuse and, like I said, all kinds of weather. And that's a crucial function for any city. I think we could all agree on that, a public service. And sure enough, we got to talking, and he said his pay was around 15. He was on a casual contract. And as probably many of you know, recent estimates for what is called a living wage in New Brunswick put the required wage, to live with some economic security and dignity closer to $20 per hour in a New Brunswick city. And looking back on that series of events, I think a lot about the tens of thousands of times that similar situations must have occurred, played out in cities and governments all over the place. We're told over and over that this is good for taxpayers, but what effect does this have on our communities? What will happen to that kid whose dad has to tough it out like that? We often hear about people falling through the cracks. And what if this kind of corporate pushback against unions only widens those cracks? We often hear about the crisis of homelessness in our city. We see it walking around on the streets, drug addiction, and the rest of it. Is it possible that some of those social problems might have something to do with the decades of neoliberalism that we have endured? Neoliberalism is a word that you will not often see in the pages of the Telegraph Journal. I did a content search once, and there wasn't a whole lot of results. There was actually an article by Danny Legere in the op-ed section, and there was a review of a Bob Dylan record from the Washington Post, if I remember correctly. So I guess to sum up, I think that that there are mass media that want the public to think of unions as their enemy. The people who they want unions to be seen as the people who are making their lives harder. And they have a lot of allies, politicians, businesses, chambers of commerce. And that's why I think we need some other kind of media. And that's why I think that the NB Media Co-op matters, and why I'm proud to work with people like Susan and everyone at the NB Media Co-op. And I guess that's all that I really want to say, except thank you to everyone who supported this project. Professor Frank's indispensable help at every stage. And to my partner Natalia as well for her indispensable support. And I think my folks are tuning in back home out west where I'm from. So hello to them as well. Thanks a lot.
That was great. Appreciate that very much. And what was even greater was getting an opportunity to meet and work with you, David, on this project. You did an amazing job. Again, all three of you were just top notch, and you made sure to capture the stories of these workers, a story that needs to be told. And it needs to be told and retold, because anything is possible with collective action. And our workers demonstrated that, as did our leaders. Not only were they showing solidarity, we received solidarity from private sector unions, other unions, and many other social organizations, social justice groups out there. Some of them may be here with us tonight. I like the authors and some of the people that have already said, this is a very exciting moment. I never believed this would happen, but it's nowhere near as exciting as it was on November 2nd when we had 6,000 people on that legislature and the workers took back the power. That was one of the greatest feelings I'll ever have. I know that'll never be matched because we took back our house at that time. But without further ado, we couldn't have done it without our staff. I am going to let Sandy say a few words, I promise. But I know I had mentioned at the beginning of this, Candace Rennick is our National Secretary Treasurer. And Candace is one of the greatest activists I've ever met. She was active in her local when she was 16 in a nursing home. And at 19, I believe she was the very first president of that home. She went on, I might have that wrong, but I know I've heard her mention it. No, I'm pretty sure that's close. But it was only a few years later that Candace ran and was very active in the CUPE Ontario division. And then she was elected as the Secretary Treasurer. We're the largest union here in New Brunswick, 26,000. CUPE Ontario is about 10 times that size. So Ontario is a little bigger than New Brunswick, that's expected. But Candace was a Secretary Treasurer for CUPE Ontario for many years. And just in 2021 was elected as the National Secretary Treasurer. And we couldn't have a better person in the job. She's just amazing. So working with her and Mark at the helm, it's really gratifying to be on that board. So Candace, we miss you. Wish you could have been here. I'm going to share a little story then I'm going to turn it over to Sandy. But when we were actually doing picket information and we were getting ready to go on strike, so our members hadn't been on strike for years, and we said, well, they're not even going to know how to do it. We got to get some picket lines going. So we did some information pickets, and we were doing one at the liquor store in Quispamsis. Some of you may have noticed I have a disability, and we were fighting with management and the police because they were trying to kick me out of a disabled spot, because big bad CUPE, right? Anyway, long story short, we stood our ground. We weren't doing anything illegal, and we were just sharing information with the public. So the police left us alone. Management apologized after they freaked out. What the heck are you doing parking in a disabled parking spot? But was really interesting. So Sandy and I are back in Lofty. That's our RV that we traveled around. I think Sherry Hillier's here. She's our general vice president. Sherry got to travel in Lofty with us during the strike. But there we were having a sandwich saying, okay, we're getting ready to go to the next place. And I got a phone call and it was from Candace. And it was before she became national president or national secretary treasurer. And Candace said, Stephen, we've been watching what Sandy and the staff and your leaders and your workers have been doing for some time. You're really inspiring the rest of us. So CUPE Ontario is going to make a substantial donation to CUPE New Brunswick to help you with the fight. And if you need more, you pick up that phone and you call us. And if you need anything, you want us here, pick up the phone, call us. We'll be here tomorrow. And when we were on strike, our leaders were here. Our national executive board and many divisions came to New Brunswick to support the workers because it's the right thing to do. Anyway, that's all I have to say. It's been an exciting project, but I'd like to turn it over to Sandy. And it was amazing working with you and your staff as well, Sandy. Thank you.
So thank you very much. And I'd like to say thank you very much to Susan, David, and David. It's great. And the Media Co-op does such great work to capture our story when we know in this province, we didn't ever get a fair shake with the Irving media. And in fact, you know, they would go out of their way to not give us a fair shake and knock unions. So thank you very much. And I'm so proud of this book for a lot of reasons. And, you know, one thing that always stuck with me were the children in this province who were on the lines, you know, going to visit their bus driver or going to visit their EA or walking with their mom who was a healthcare worker or walking with their dad who was a 1190 member. What was done in this province will have a generational effect. Those children saw workers stand up, fight, and win. And we haven't had something like that in a long time. So it's something to be extraordinarily proud of in this province. And when Mark says it was the spark that's gone across Canada, that's true. The calls we got from Ontario, the calls I've gotten from across Canada, and that was you. This is your book. I want to see every one of these books in schools. This is something this is labor history that should be taught. You know, Danny, one of the resolutions we're talking about sending to the Fed is about having labor education back in schools. So, you know, I'm just so proud. The leaders led, our allies. I see so many of our allies in the crowd, you know, came to our defense and spoke for us. That was important. That's why we work in coalitions and we have our allies. So, you know, I just want you to know that, you know, this is your book. We're just leafing through and looking at the pictures and you know, I get feelings looking at some of these pictures, and you will too, because you lived it. You know, I laugh at the one where, you know, Simone is grabbing the microphone back from Higgs, right? Like, that's hilarious. But, you know, and Steve and I have a meeting with Premier Higgs. Something came through today on the 24th. And, you know, it was an idea from somebody over in PEI. I don't want to take that. They want to buy books and they want to give it to their premier, Danny King, and say, you know, look what's coming. And I said, wouldn't it be good if we have our meeting with Higgs and give him a book? And I said to Simone, we should figure out how many times he's mentioned in there. So Simone did his quick research. He said he's mentioned 74 times in here. So I said, at the end of that meeting, Steve, that we have, we're going to give him a book and say, you're mentioned 74 times in here. You might want to read. So, you know, I just, you know, thank yous all the way around. You know, the leaders led, and that was important. And you made a difference. And you're going to continue to make a difference. And like I said, I come back to the children on the line and what they saw and what they experienced, that, you know, when we fight, we can win. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sandy. Always inspiring words, and we've got a lot to remember. That was quite a ride, I'll tell you. So at this point of the evening, we're going to open it up for questions, but I know there's a lot of people here that may want to know how they may get a book. We only had a limited edition come here, and but we do have a substantial order coming to New Brunswick. So there's several ways that you can get it. I know, Simon, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but people can go on the CUPE.ca website, and there's a form there and they can fill it out. And that's open to anyone. Anyone can access that, and Simon can, I know he's going to provide that information to Dr. Frank and to some of the others so that it's published out there. I'm sure the New Brunswick Media Co-op, who do a great job representing real people, will make sure that that information is there as well. We're also going to have some books at some of the offices here once we receive them. And anyone within CUPE that wants one, go through your executive, just let them know, and they can contact either Kim or myself or someone on the executive. And, you know, if CUPE 1418 wants 20 books, give us a call. We'll make sure that we get them to you in a timely. I'm just using that as a hypothetical example. I'm from 1418. But anyway, the books can be ordered online, but we're also going to make sure there's quite a few here in New Brunswick available to our members. Any of the members or locals that want them, or any of our allies or colleagues or friends. And you'll have to get in contact with either Kim or myself to see how they're going to be rolled out in New Brunswick once we receive them. So I'm going to wrap this up, but I want to say that, well, no, I'm going to open it up for questions. But once the question period is completed, we actually have just some foods out there for a little bit of a reception. You may wish to mingle or talk and have a little bite to eat before you hit the road. So great to see you all here. I'm so thankful and for all of the incredible work that you've done on this. I just received it this afternoon. I haven't even had a chance to go through it, but I'm really looking forward to it. I know what I'll be doing tonight. And so without further ado, are there any questions for our steering committee, our authors, Sandy, or anybody that was involved in this process? Simon has a mic. If anyone would like to ask any questions, just put your hand up. Allô, confrère. Bonjour. Let's go, Danielle. Yeah, I remember going to Edmundston and rolling in, and man, what a reception that was. 300 of them there met us. We had Sherry up there as well. Okay. Well, listen, can't thank you enough, not for coming here tonight, but for the great work you do for this province day in and day out, regardless of the conditions. We have workers that are out there in the storms and some of the worst conditions out there. What you did in 2021 was inspiring, but what you do every day is so important to the citizens of this province. This is our province. We all deserve good quality public services, and we all deserve to make a fair living. So keep up the great work. It's an absolute honor working with you. Take care.